Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
You've just heard an advert there for the Page One notebook, which is our writer's notebook that we created and ran a Kickstarter campaign for. And as we record this, there are less than 24 hours to go in the campaign, and I'm pleased to say we are fully funded.
Fully funded, how exciting.
And we've hit 2 stretch goals, which means people get to choose more things. There's page numbers now in the book. And we're on the verge of getting the 3rd, which will give people the choice of a red book as well. So it's gone awesome. If you're wondering what on earth we're going on about...
in life or just...
Well, yeah, if you're wondering what we're going on about in life, you're in the majority. But about the notebook, you can get a link in the podcast description. There is a store that it links to, so even if you've missed the Kickstarter campaign, you can still grab a Page One notebook. But enough about that. Who have we got on the podcast this week, Tarek?
This week we have Helen Fitzgerald, an author. She's written 13 books, I think it is. A domestic noir is the description that's kind of used for her. She's written some really good books. The one that people might know her best for is The Cry, which was adapted recently as a BBC drama.
It's a great show,
yeah. Yeah, really good book and really good show as well. And we chatted to her about that, about the adaptation and what it's like seeing something that you've written turned into a TV show and how it must feel to hand over control of that to somebody else.
And we also talk about our new book, Worst Case Scenario, which I read and it's really good. But I won't say too much about it because we talk about it more in the podcast. Helen very kindly started the podcast by talking about our notebook because her partner is Sergio Casci, who we've had on the podcast before. So Sergio has already got a Page One notebook and Helen's seen it. So she was talking about that when we started recording. So we'll just get straight into it and we'll be back at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. No, I really like that notebook. It's exactly how I plan a book with the sections are exactly in the right order and everything for how I would sort of go about it.
Oh, fantastic.
Really good. I've just been using moleskins for ages and I can never find anything. It's all just full of scribble, really.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, I've got, for my latest project, I've got stuff noted down in various books myself, so it is trying to find the right thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I suppose to start at the beginning, how is it that you got into writing?
Well, so when I always wanted to write, and I was always, writing diaries as a kid and teenager and so forth. And my mum was a literature teacher, so she was always very interested in language, and we were always reading stories. And she would have been a writer if she hadn't had a stupid number of children, I think, So. Yeah. It was something that was always there. And then when Serge and I met, he was the same. It was something that we both always thought, wow, wouldn't that be great? And we loved doing, but never felt like it would be ever possible to be a job, So both of us were sort of late in life coming to it. But we decided that we would start writing screenplays and try and get into that because TV and film are our great loves first and foremost, really. So Serge did that and immediately sort of got things made and was able to work full-time as a writer. We had kids and I just didn't have any ideas for another 20 years. So that's what happened to that. And then I started writing screenplays when I was 9 months pregnant with our second and last child, Joe. And that got interest from Scottish Screen, and because of it there's a lot about who you know, I suppose, in the business, and I knew Serge's screenwriting agent. He liked my screenplay, so he represented it, but I just didn't get anywhere with the screenwriting. Mm-hmm. There was quite a lot of development money going around back then, so I had money coming in, which was great, but it became very frustrating not to see anything actually happen with the stories that I was writing.
Sure, yeah.
So I decided to write a book, and it just came out really, really easily after about 6 or 7 years of the screenwriting attempts. And I think learning so much about story and character and, all of the rules. I really like all of those, the sort of the rules of screenwriting, really. And I write in a 3-act structure, and I have the inciting incident at the, 10% into the book. And all of that stuff has definitely sort of made the process of writing the novel easier for me, I think. So I wrote the novel. It was much better than anything I'd written in in script form. You know, my prose was just easier. I felt it easier to do, and I got an agent immediately through my screenwriting agent, and I got a book deal pretty much immediately with Faber and Faber. So
Brilliant.
It was pretty easy getting the book deal, but I had put in the groundwork, I think, with the screenwriting for about 7 years.
Sure, yeah. And did you, and you got your agent through your screenwriting agent, did you say that?
Yeah. So I sent it to him and said, do you know anyone? He recommended 2 people, and that's how I got a literary agent.
What did you do before getting into writing?
So I've always throughout my career been a social worker, and I work in criminal justice social work in Scotland. So it's probation and parole, supervising people on community payback orders and things. So working with offenders basically. So it's pretty full of stories and
lots
ideas.
of inspiration.
Oh, just so much, even just down to what's going through the courts at the time, how punishment, how things are being punished, new laws like for revenge pornography, for example. Mm-hmm. That was all sort of just about to become a law when I wrote Viral. So it's always just really, huge amounts of interesting stuff going on in criminal justice.
Sorry, I've just been reading Worst Case Scenario, and obviously the main character in that is very much in that world. Yeah.
Diary of 2017. That's kind of like what could have happened if I wasn't to leave, Yeah. So.
Yeah, but because I think I've read somewhere that you called your novels a domestic noir type of thing, and is that definitely linked to your job that you had before writing?
Domestic noir was a term that sort of. When I started writing, there wasn't a lot of the, sort of girl on the train in the coat and the, all those books. Yeah. It was sort of, I feel like I was sort of at the start of that a bit. I mean, there's always been great stories written by women like that, but it became a real movement, I think, where, it was becoming more inside the house and a central female lead character. So as a friend, actually, Julia Crouch, who came up with the term domestic noir, which I think was really just, something that we could call it, that was kind of, we're talking about relationships and family probably as much as anything else in these stories. So, no, it was nothing to do with my work. It was really feels like a movement that's very entrenched now. There's a lot of books now that are sort of dealing with that kind of subject matter.
Since you got that book deal, you've been very prolific in terms of the number of books you've got out there. I mean, you must have quite a disciplined process, I would have thought, to get all of that done.
Yeah. So I'm laughing because I'm just so undisciplined this year. You would have no idea. I've been so lucky that I had the Cry was greenlit and I had enough money just to watch telly. But yeah, after when I wrote that first book, it was just I couldn't believe it. I was having the tools of sort of story writing finally behind me, which I just didn't know anything about actually when I started trying years ago. It just flowed out of me so easily, and I really didn't know what I was doing. If I would never read my first book again, Dead Lovely, because it was something like I was completely reckless, and I did know the screenwriting rules and everything, but there were things like point of view, which I just went for it and went all over the place with points of view and third and first person, and and I think it was just a real stroke of luck that it seemed to work. So I was going to say that I've slowed down a lot since then. I wrote about 8, I just vomited them out. Uh-huh. But also I think I've now been through the editing process so much that I'm just much more of a perfectionist now. I don't commit anything to paper unless I'm really sure about it.
Mm-hmm. So has your writing style changed quite a bit then from when you first started, and what is your writing style now?
Yeah, I was all over the place. It was fun. I think I started off, I was writing fun books. They were entertaining, and somewhere along the line I got very dark, the cry and everything. And I'm wanting to get back to the fun thing again, I think. That's what I'm sort of trying to do in Worst Case Scenario. The way that my writing's changed is I think now because I think I've had the TV stuff, and Worst Case Scenario and my book after that and Viral are also in development for TV. Right. I am just naturally thinking about scenes. Someone described Worst Case Scenario as a screenplay in prose, mm-hmm. and I feel like that's how I'm writing this one as well, Australia Day, the one I'm writing now. And I'm not meaning to. It just seems to be the only way I can do it at the moment.
Yeah, well, it was. I was, because obviously I'd seen The Cry on. I haven't read The Cry, but I saw the show on TV, and then I read Worst Case Scenario. And what struck me was that it's a very humorous book, very very dark humor, but it's funny. And obviously that wasn't there, certainly in the TV version of The Cry.
No, I mean, some of my people who like my books say that they really, didn't like that about it. That it's really hard to have humour when there's a dead kid. Yeah. I shouldn't say that. Maybe that's a spoiler, but I thought I wrote those 30 pages and like, oh my God, there's no way I can crack a joke. There's no way. So I actually brought in the ex-wife Alexandra for some light relief, really. I mean, she obviously did a lot of other things in the story as well, but she was really funny in The Cry. But in the show, it obviously wasn't really possible to show that. And I think, they did an incredible job. So I don't have any sort of complaints about that at all.
Well, let's chat about The Cry for a few moments, because obviously this is kind of the one that's quite big right now because it was on the BBC. It's still on the iPlayer, I think, at the moment. And how did that adaptation come about? How did you go from writing the book and to be turned into the TV show? So,
I mean, it's one of those overnight things that took 20 years in the making. Claire Mundell, who's the Synchronicity, she is the creative director. Is that her? Yeah, I think it's the creative director of Synchronicity. She's a producer. She's amazing. Creative producer, I suppose. Anyway, I met her when I wrote my very first book at, one of the sort of industry parties. Again, it's terrible, but it's so much to do with networking and, using the contacts that as long as you've got a decent piece of work behind you. Yeah. But I met Claire at something just after I'd written Dead Lovely, and it was exactly what she was looking for. She's just such an energetic and creative and hardworking woman, and we just gelled immediately. So she optioned Dead Lovely, which is in 2007, My Last Confession at some point. She optioned The Devil's Staircase, which is my fourth book. She's got Viral. And so Claire's been trying to get something off the ground of mine for years and years and years. So the Cry was another one of those. I think the coup came when she got Jacqueline Perskay as the screenwriter, because she's just so good. And that made, everyone was confident with that, and it just after that it was a done deal.
And it's quite a different Tarek's he was telling me about the book, and it's quite a different structure that the TV show had from the book. They seem to I don't know if we should say a spoiler alert, but obviously, there's something that happens halfway through the show, and it's a big twist, and it actually happens quite near the start of the book.
I know, and that was my big worry, because I think what my people who liked the book liked about it was that it was sort of playing around with the structure, that mystery bit wasn't there. I still had twists in it, but I just didn't have that major twist. And I was really worried that would make it sort of the same as every other missing baby story. But I think that actually I thought it was just brilliant how they did it. I mean, people loved the guessing, and the Twitter was so fun to follow when all of that was happening. But also in my prose, I was constantly flashing back. So I did sort of start on the plane, but I go back to their relationship. I go back to the affair. I go back to all of the stuff that's happened. So actually all of the stuff they put in those first 2 episodes was in the book, just in different spots. And I think they worked it really well, very, very clever. I mean, it was so engrossing.
It was, and I think they cast it perfectly as well. Actually, I think everyone worked well in it.
Oh gosh, people hated Alistair so much. I became a little bit defensive. I mean, I did. I'm like, but poor guy.
So, did you have any involvement in the writing process at all once you handed it over?
I handed it over. I didn't want any involvement, and there's no way I would have been commissioned. So you kind of got to be realistic at certain points in your career as to how beneficial you're going to be to a project getting made. But I was really happy to do that, and I didn't want to write it. I find screenwriting really hard. It's really, really hard. And so I met with Jacqueline at dinner, and Claire sort of did a nice dinner for us, and we chatted about it, and we kind of made sure that we liked the same things about the story, and that what Jacqueline had in her head and the characters she had in her head was the same. And I felt just very confident, and also I just never expected it to get made.
So if you'd had that chat with her and you'd thought, I don't think she's really grabbed the essence of the characters or the story, would you have said at that point, no, I don't want to do it with you?
No, I probably would have said, can I come to the meetings? Because Claire always offered that at the start. You know, do you want to at least read the scripts and have feedback? You know, if that had been the case, I probably just would have wanted to be reading the scripts as they were done and putting some input in, I think.
What is it like having someone else playing with your characters, if you like?
Well, it's actually, I just can't get over. I came after watching the first 2 episodes. I rushed home because I don't look at my books after I've written them. But I kind of opened up. I'm thinking, did I write that? Because every single line she wrote felt like I'd written it. So everything Joanna said, everything Alistair said, felt, you know, even if it wasn't exactly the same or in the same place, I felt like I had written it. You know, so the essence was exactly, you know, what I wanted and what I had in the book. I think if Jacqueline and I, you know, were given sort of scenarios, Joanna goes into a bar, you know, and she hasn't got the money, but she's had half the drink, you know, we'd come up probably with the same dialogue. I think we both really know the characters well, and that just showed so much in the show, I think.
Yeah, it definitely did. It was a very tightly written show.
And I think you're right. I think I definitely thought the characters were very well cast and written, having read the book. And it was interesting because the twist was moved later on in the show. You viewed folk like Alexandra, you viewed her in a different light than you did in the book when you knew her role was uncertain in the show for longer. And that was interesting seeing that change.
Yeah, it was all those red herrings, which I was like, I'm not going to trick the audience. That's just a cheap thing to do. But you know what? People really like it. And I think I just need to be less stupid commercially and stuff.
No, but it is interesting. I think, you know, for me, I read the book on the plane, rather aptly perhaps. And the first part of it, I read the first act really on the flight. And I couldn't believe that's how the first act ended. And it was one of the most kind of arresting openings of a book I've read in ages, and that was, I think, because as you say, normally that's the kind of thing you push way back, so it was really good having that early on. Yeah, and I really just wanted to make sure that it was about a relationship, what kind of couple makes decisions like they did, you know. So that was my main focus, really. But yeah, it was a great fun thing watching that on telly and sort of following Twitter at the same time. Fun and terrifying.
And you say viral and worst case scenario are also optioned, do they? Yeah, so viral, Claire's got that. I mean, you get these things optioned and you may never hear anything again. And the worst case scenario, I'm not allowed to announce yet who, but it was a 7-way auction for that, and it's gone to a studio in America. So that's very exciting. Oh, really? So, interesting, yeah. Yeah, well, it is, you know. Show me the money, I keep saying. Yeah, show me the money, whatever. So is it still going to be set in Glasgow then, or is it going to be? Well, no, if they do it, it will be Americanised. Right, so it's kind of like, oh, that's a shame, because it's kind of south side of Glasgow, and I really enjoyed writing about the south side in this book. It's where I'm from, and I love it here. So it's a real bummer, but anyway. Yeah, that struck a real chord with me when I was reading it. Obviously, I suppose it does with any book, that you know the places and you know it draws you in that little bit more if you know all of that, I think. Yeah. Would you ever go back to trying to write screenplays, or are you just out of that? No, so what's happened now is because of The Cry, I guess, and I think also because Worst Case Scenario really did read quite screenplay, and, you know, just absolutely people could just immediately see it, you know, on the screen. I think I got a lot of interest from that. So I'm actually working with Claire. My next book is called Australia Day, and it's a disaster story, a bushfire story set in Australia. And I'm also sort of at the same time as writing the book, which has been a bit of a, you know, it's been a bit difficult. I've just written a treatment for a TV series for that, and I'm writing the book at the same time. So Claire's kind of, you know, giving me a shot at it. In terms of that other one, I've got contracts now for that one, and another concept that I've sold to another
company in Australia, Easy Tiger. So I've got a lot of, I'm dipping myself back in, and it's really, really fun, but it's hard. I do find it harder writing screenplays than books. You can just blab stuff out. And if you've forgotten to put something in, you can just, do a wee flashback, put it in here, you know.
And actually in screenplays as well, in prose, it can be easier to get to know the characters, I think, because you're spending so much time with them, whereas in screenplays it can be difficult to give the audience that quick view of what that character is. I think it's a real skill when you're able to do that on the page.
Yeah, I think that's why adaptations are such a big thing. But so we'll see. We shall see. Yeah, but trying to write these screenplays, it's just I found more and more that I'm writing more and more dialogue in my books now. So I'm hoping that I'm just going to get good at it by accident.
So you're writing your book right now, and how do you write your books? How do you draft and redraft? How does that work for you?
So it's usually the idea. There's one idea maybe that I've had for years and years, and if you realise something is staying with you for a long time, then that's something that I'll pick. But I notice in your wonderful notebook that the sections you have is pretty much what I rarely is the crime. I would have another section for the crime story bit, actually, because to me that's just a separate thing I chuck into the drama. But I would normally start with an incident. I mean, so for example, I was really thinking about, the bushfires in Australia and disasters and how, they're happening more and more often, and how ill-prepared small towns are to cope with them. So that's the first sort of step in that. And then I'll need, who my characters are. And I always really try to get an interesting family dynamic, basically. So every single one of my stories, I try and make the family a bit unusual in some way,
Yeah.
So the biographies, to me, more and more as I write, as I write more and more biographies, if I haven't done those really, really thoroughly before anything, then there's no point. It's not going to work. And also that once I'm writing those biographies for the characters, everything else just comes out of it, like the plot and the crime story, So the biographies, I'd say, would be my main sort of I would spend the longest time on. And I think once I've got those people, everything else just comes,
And do you need to have the all of the beats of the story set out in your head before you start, or not?
Probably, yeah. More and more. Again, more and more. I'm maybe becoming more screenwritery, because originally that's what I didn't like about screenwriting, was all of the planning that you do. Writing treatments, I hate that. So boring. And whoever wants to read a treatment? But yeah, so I'm just going to say menopause now because I've forgotten your story.
And it's interesting because you say you start from a character point of view first. So do you start with them before you even know what the crime is or what the story is going to be? Do you have these people and you throw them into a situation? Yeah,
so say for The Cry, I would have started with this couple who had an affair. That was my main interest, that, what effect did that have? What sort of relationship were they going to have after that happened? Where did that leave the other woman? How did this guy end up with two pretty similar women and have such an enormous impact on them, Mm-hmm. So then, I can't remember when the rest of it came, but yeah, I don't know. I think it varies every time too. But it's a tortuous process. And the thing is, you think I've got it all. I've pretty much nailed this. I think it's all in my head, the beats of the story. And then you realise that you just haven't done at all. You're completely not anywhere near where you think you were. I'm finding it more and more sort of tortuous and a bit like going through therapy every time I write something.
And so do you sort of bash through the first draft, leave it for a while and come back to it, or do you sort of revise as you go?
It's really changed. So I used to bash out a first draft. Saying that, when bashing out a first draft, and with probably the first 10 books this was the case, I would write a first draft in 3 months, although I would always read it from the start every day, and apparently you're supposed to do that, but I just had to do that to get into the story again every day. So I was constantly editing. But now I spend so little time. So I used to be all about sitting at the desk writing my 1,000 to 2,000 words a day, and that was all that mattered. Just get the words out. And, there are friends who are doing sprints online, and you would support each other doing an hour sprint. I can't do that anymore. So it doesn't make any sense for me. I walk around from room to room for about 3 days trying to get a scene in my head, just one scene.
Yeah.
And there's always about a list of 20 things that I want that scene to achieve. And the actual writing down on the computer will probably take about 10 minutes, but it might have taken me a week of walking around looking like, a zombie.
Yeah, watching RuPaul was Sergio's, seemed to be Sergio's solution.
I'm really into Below Deck now. I think I'm watching all really, really trashy reality TV. All this really heavy stuff. I think that's what you need, some relief afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It is interesting because I think so much of the writing process does happen in your head, and I've definitely found that sitting down trying to write sometimes, trying to force words out isn't really working. It's because there's a problem in the plot or the character, and you do need to work through it in your head before you can write it. Yeah,
I used to just work through it on the page, and I really want to apologise to readers of my early books. It's definitely really, really changed how I write.
Will you, once you've got a draft that you're happy with, do you show it to anyone for feedback before you then try and do another draft or anything like that?
Yeah, I always show it to quite a few people. So worst case scenario, my husband, I was really not feeling well while I was writing that, and he really helped me reading out loud as we went along, and I'm like, oh yeah, that does sound okay. Oh, okay, it's worth going on, and I write some. So Serge always reads, all the time. We do that for each other. And I also showed a young friend of my daughter's who's a literature student, and because I wanted a young feminist to read and see what her perspective on it was. I showed it to an older friend. I showed it to the friends whose opinions would really scare me if they didn't like, if I'd written something that offended them or whatever. I really bombarded a lot of people with it, and I always do. And then when I feel okay, that's all right, I'll send it off to my agent.
Well, that's quite interesting, because how do you know, you hand it over to people and they give you some feedback, and do you pick and choose what stuff to listen to and what stuff to ignore?
I'm really I like having criticism, and as long as I always make sure the people I give it to are people whose opinions, really matter to me, and who I believe, and who will tell me the truth. So, so Lisa O'Donnell is a friend of mine. She's a great writer, and she's brutal. She's really absolutely, and really helpful. She went through it with me so many times and gave me so many great notes and things. I was talking about that younger woman, Robin. She wrote me a reader's report. I asked her to because I was really scared about this book. I just thought I didn't really know if it was any good or not, Mm-hmm. So I don't see any point in giving it to people who, just to read. If it's someone who genuinely wants to, is interested in, and I feel will help, then I'm all over it. It's so good.
And how do you get to that stage where you know something is finished? Because one of the things that I do, and I know it's a terrible, I can constantly find something to redraft or refix, or and often it'll probably be damaging what's already there, really. So how do you get to that stage where you say, no, that's it, I'm passing this one on now, it's ready to go?
That's it's interesting. For me, it's definitely I've stopped thinking about it. It's like after a year of having this whole other universe in your head that you're constantly walking around as well as your own. It's like, the ideas have stopped coming, because you'll have months of saying, all right, if I put that there, and if she does this, and if I just change that, and how many days is that, and those questions, when those stop, then I think, rightio, I've got no more to give. So send it off. Yeah, it's really scary every time though.
And you mentioned at the start that you're a big fan of writing rules. And do you use these a lot when you're writing? And what examples have you got that you could share?
So let me think. Well, I guess I always think in a 3-act structure, mm-hmm. and the inciting it. I always have something happening pretty much straight away that sort of ticks things over. One of my favourite things is. One of the things that's most important to me, which a lot of books really disappoint me, I feel like you'll get this great writing, especially in crime books, for about half of the book, and then just all this exposition and a terrible ending. And it seems like endings don't matter very much. That, you know, as long as the first half, that'll sell, you know. So for me, it's getting the ending right. It's one of my major, and I don't even want to start writing a book unless I've worked out the ending. Mm. Yeah, I don't know what your question was, but
no, that's because, you know, folk always say you should write what you know and all that kind of stuff. And I think from the people we've talked to so far, everyone seems to say, yeah, you know, certain rules are worth following, but you need to know when to break them and stuff like that. And I think that's
and I'm really into breaking them, and I think that knowing them is really important first. Yeah.
And have you ever? I mean, all your books are, you know, sort of contained stories, and it probably links back to what you were saying about you just stop thinking about that universe and you know it's done. I mean, there's no. Are there any stories that you'd want to revisit or see what's happened to these characters?
No. Well, maybe worst case scenario, I think I could probably write Mary Forever, and I feel like I tried really hard at this because I had the TV thing in my head as well, that I wanted to make sure there was a story engine that could just keep on going, you know. I don't generally do it, and I never have, except I wrote Dead Lovely, and then I tried, and everybody was very excited about the book, so I was convinced to drop the book I was doing and to write a sort of sequel, and I did, called My Last Confession, and I really didn't like that book. That's my least favourite book. I felt like I couldn't put the character through the mill again, and I love putting the character through just those terrible, terrible situations you can. So I've never wanted to do that again. But with worst case scenario, I genuinely feel I could pick up another 2 or 3 characters and, you know, do book after book, using those with maybe Mary. I think I'd have at least two points of view if I did it. So, you know, Mary would be sort of half. So maybe worst case scenario again if someone shows me the money.
And obviously you've written a lot of books, 13 books in 12 years, I think it is. You've done or so, and especially at the start, you kind of wrote. You know, I think you wrote 3 in 1 year, or 3 books in 1 year came out anyway. Back in 2009. And how do you find the time really to write this number of books, and you know, with their life and family and stuff?
I'm trying to remember what I was doing. What was I doing? I was sitting opposite. I think I had a seriously lengthy manic episode, and I'm paying for it now. I'm serious, because I don't know how I did that. I mean, my books are pretty short. They're 60,000 words. A lot of my friends are writing 100,000. To me, that's like, you know, they're writing 2 books a year. And it does come pretty easily, usually. And I think after I'd done 3, I felt like, I know I can do this again now. So that, you know, you can, once you know you can do it, it takes a lot of the fear away, I think. Yeah,
I mean, is that something that you went through at the start, then, that kind of doubt that I think a lot of writers go through, of getting halfway through a draft and thinking this is just absolute crap, and then, you know, having to push through that?
I go through that every day, and all my colleagues do in a crime writing world as well. It's so weird that something can read as pure genius at night, and then you read it the next day and think, oh my God, what the hell is that? I wrote a half a book last year, the year before last, and I dumped it. I got rid of the whole thing, and wrote worst case scenario. And I think that's because I'd left work, so I thought I can write this now because, you know, I'm not in the job. So.
And when you throw something away like that, is it thrown away, or is it just in a drawer somewhere that you might one day try and revisit that?
I've already there's a couple of little snippets of scenarios I had that maybe, instead of being a third of a book, are now like a third of a paragraph, you know. Yeah. So I think I got carried away with concepts in that one I'm talking about, and it just didn't have the characters or anything interesting about it. So I'm really glad I dumped it. I did the right thing. But no, I don't think I'll ever show that to anyone.
So what's the next thing that we'll see? I know you've mentioned a few projects that you're doing right now, but what's the next thing you've got coming out?
So Worst Case Scenario is coming out in paperback on the 16th of May, and Australia Day, which I'm still writing, is out next, I don't know what month next year, but in 2020. So my main thing at the moment is getting that book finished.
Okay, and so is it? Do they lock you down to a date as you're writing it? Does they say it has to be done by this date and that's it?
Well, it's a bit kind of weird at the moment because I'm doing the screenwriting thing at the same time. So they're wanting the book more than my publisher is at the moment. So I'm just trying to get it done as fast as I can. Yeah.
And is that a kind of the girl with all the gifts type situation where you're writing the book and the screenplay at the same time?
Well, I did a treatment and now I've sort of handed that in, but I know I want to get part one of the book so that we can, because I didn't surprise myself in the treatment. Some of the stuff that happens when you're writing, some of the best things that have come out, have happened by surprise along the way. And writing a treatment seems to just deaden that part of my imagination. So I'm now writing the book so that we can then revisit the treatment and ramp it up a bit.
And we were speaking to someone else actually that had a similar process. Tara was just saying that it was a guy, Mike Carey, who wrote The Girl with All the Gifts, the film and the book at the same time. And what he said is because they've got kind of different gestation periods. So he sort of wrote the book, but then the film, and he wrote the screenplay, but the film was, it took however long, 18 months before it actually they started shooting it and stuff. So that's the story still kind of bubbled away. And as a result, the film kind of changed a little bit in certain parts. And he actually liked what he did at the end of the film better than what he'd done in the book in the end of the day.
That's interesting. Yeah. I'm finding the process of doing the two at the same time a little bit difficult. And I think Luke Jennings, who's doing The Killing Eve, he's writing he's doing the same, I think, kind of working with the TV people at the same time as writing a book. And it's kind of an interesting new way that people are working in TV, actually, where they're asking, I think Leanne Moriarty as well, HBO asked her to write a novella so that they could do a sequel to Big Little Lies based on that. Uh-huh. So I'd love to do that. If I could just do novellas for TV companies, that'd be great.
Well, as you say, it seems to be something that's starting to happen more and more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's recognising. It's nice that producers are recognising that what the creative thing happens when you write a book on your own in an attic, and with no one telling you, this is wrong. No, you can't. We haven't got the budget for that. No, it's it really does. The freedom of it is. I'm noticing more and more how important it is. Trying to do these two things at the same time. Yeah, and I'm just hoping I can then insert some of the magic back into the screenplay. Because
I suppose that's right. When you write a screenplay, you do have to keep the real world aspect of how much would it cost to film. I've written this great scene in 0G gravity, but the reality is that will never happen because it's going to cost too much. So and does that stop you from writing stuff?
Yeah, and also there's a lot of meetings. It's very much, collaborative, obviously. So, very early on, people are saying things that, don't do this, or, how about this, how about that? And I think I'm learning to be sort of more confident. But at the start of the process, I'm never confident. So, you can go anywhere. So I feel like I maybe get a little easily swayed, and can sometimes go off on the wrong route when it's very collaborative. And I prefer just to be on my own, working out what works and what doesn't work.
Well, we like to end each podcast with some quick fire questions. So it's a sort of one or the other type scenario, but feel free to expand on any of these. But I'm going to start with one that I asked Sergio because it'll be interesting the answer we get. I got to ask this because I'm also Italian, so I get pizza or pasta?
Oh, pasta. Okay, yeah.
He was sort of half and half, he said.
Was he? Oh,
well, he said pasta, but he would sometimes have pizza with it or something.
Well, that would be the ideal situation. But desert island, if I had to choose, definitely pasta. I could eat that every meal easily.
Cool.
That's why I married Serge.
Marvel or DC?
They're comics, aren't they? I'm such a girl, aren't I? I have no idea.
Fair enough. Real book or e-book?
Real book, yeah. I've tried to get into ebooks. I just can't. And I know it all makes sense, but no, I love a real book. I love it just having them on my shelf if I'm not reading them.
TV or cinema?
TV. Cinemas are mostly really uncomfortable now, and our lounge is really comfortable. And you can eat whatever you want and get the toilet. We're getting very old, yeah.
It's
TV.
interesting that the more people than I thought would vote for TV. I would have thought I would have thought the cinema would be the best, but no.
Well, I think 10 years ago it would be, but TV is so exciting right now. I mean,
that's true. It is.
Oh, so many great things coming out, and they're all really a lot of bold stuff. And I think television's amazing at the moment.
Fleabag or Killing Eve?
Fleabag. So I really loved both. I adored both. But Fleabag, I think, is probably the best thing I've seen in years.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, so, I just finished watching series 2. I think we watched it in one day, just blasted through it, and it was just, as you say, some of the best things I've watched in TV.
Absolutely glorious writing. I just love it. Yeah, really good. I mean, related to everything in it. You know, it was so nice for women, actually, I think, just to have that character out there. It was fantastic. I think Luke Jennings called her a reckless writer. She says, and I just love that recklessness about her writing. She's amazing.
And last one, a fancy restaurant or takeaway?
Oh, takeaway. Fancy restaurants. There's never any music. The lighting's always bad. So you're sitting, the table's too big, so you can't really hear each other, and everyone can hear you if you and also you get stupid portions of things, don't you? Stupid little portions.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been touched an awful lot, putting those little twigs and stuff.
and of course, a takeaway you can mix with the TV, and you can just have two.
Exactly, that's pretty much what we do every night.
That was a great chat. Really nice chat with Helen. Really enjoyed that, especially the part about the cry. I have to say, I found it quite fascinating chatting about the differences between a book and a TV show. And
yeah, I mean, they completely. I mean, as I said in the thing, I've not read the book, but you have, and you've seen the show as well.
Yeah.
And they seem to have restructured it quite a lot to put in. To effectively turn something that's at the start of the book into a twist. We don't want to spoil anything.
No,
here.
But it really changes the feel of it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like although it sounds completely different, and yet at the same time, it sounds like it kept the essence of everything that was in the book as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, at its heart, it's the same story with the same folk involved. It's just the nature of the tale is slightly slanted.
Yeah, and as Helen was saying, it's the characters really that are the main things in her stories.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't change. The essence of that doesn't change.
I mean, in some ways, it's almost the opposite way that I write anyway, which is going for the character first. And then, she had the characters before she even had the baby, which is, I would have thought would be the other way around completely. The baby is the inciting incident, but that was kind of incidental to it. So, a very interesting method.
Yeah, and I can also highly recommend her latest book, Worst Case Scenario. As I said to Helen, it's a very funny book, but it's not the sort of book you would think would be very funny about a criminal justice social worker and suicide and stuff like that. It doesn't sound like
a comedy, Marco.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's really funny and amazing that it's been optioned to America. That'll be very exciting. I quite look forward to seeing that, and also to seeing the changes they make again in that one.
Yeah, especially because it's an American setting, presumably. That potentially even more of a change in The Cry.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens with that. Who have we got on next week?
Next week we have Mark Billingham, a crime writer who's done close to 20 books. Is his 20th book coming out soon?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's right. Next year. But yeah, he's best-selling. Top of all the bestseller lists, crime novelist. Also used to be an actor, comedian. He's in a band. He's a man of many talents. Hosts a podcast as well. But,
absolutely, it's all the best people do.
Stab in the Dark is his podcast, which is a really good one. He speaks to crime authors in that one. So yeah, I had a really good chat with Mark. So tune in for that. It's another good one.
And as always, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can send us a tweet to @right_gear or an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk.
And as always, thanks to Simon Stokes for his production assistance.
And we'll leave you with a final message for page 1, the writer's notebook. And don't forget, even though the campaign's finished, you can still grab a page 1. There's an online store. The link is in the description in the podcast.
Yeah, so please do check it out. We hope you like it. And before we go, a couple of things. If you could rate us on Apple Podcasts, I think they're the only ones that do a rating. But if you could leave us a rating, that would be really helpful because it pushes up the charts, unless you're giving us 1 star, in which case please don't leave us a rating. And it would also be really great if you could give us a vote in the British Podcasts Awards. And they've got a website, britishpodcastawards.com. There's a Listener's Choice Award where you can just type in the Page 1 podcast. If you type in the Page 1 podcast, we'll pop up. You can put a vote for us. And that would be awesome if you could do that. Give us a bit more exposure. So the more exposure we have, the higher we are in the rankings, the better the people we can get on the podcast and the more of these that we can record for you.
Fantastic. All right, guys, we'll see you next week.
See ya.